Hello and welcome back to MR Realities, a podcast that my good friend Kevin Gray up in Tokyo and me, Dave McCaughan here in Bangkok, do, where we try to talk to experts around the world in various aspects related to market research and try to understand the reality of what's actually happening in the MR world. Exciting guest today, which I'll allow Kevin to introduce.
Yeah, his name is Andrew Cannon, and I think many of you will have heard of him. Thank you very much for joining us today from Helsinki.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, okay. Well, a lot of people will know of you, or perhaps, and certainly know you and maybe have worked with you, but could you just, in a few minutes, briefly introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, definitely. So, Andrew Cannon, suppose showing my age, but I've been doing this for coming close to 35 years now. So definitely long in the tooth when it comes to experience. Really running the whole gamut of experience in our sector, from the agency client side, also dabbling in the software side over the years, being part of large global multinationals on the client side, and then also on the agency side, as well as experience growing and running my own business. So lots of different experience. And then for the last 5-6 years or so, I've been running something called the GRBN, the Global Research Business Network, which is the global trade federation for the industry, which brings together all of the regional and national associations around the world. So, for example, JMRA in Japan would be an example of that, and APRC, the regional federation in your part of the world. So we bring them all together, really with the mission to try and protect and promote the global industry, the sector, should I say more broadly, to ensure that we've all got jobs down the line, and clients are still benefiting from what we're doing.
Well, this must keep you very busy.
Yeah, it's a bit like herding cats maybe, or tilting against windmills. Sometimes, the powers in the world are quite strong at the moment. So, but we try our best, right? That's all we can do. Wake up every day and try our best.
Yeah, well,
So,
today
Andrew,
we were going to...
Yeah, so Andrew, today we were going to talk about insights and what are real insights or your points of view. Kevin and I talk about this all the time. I think all three of us probably get asked the same questions, which is, well, what is an insight? And sometimes, depending on the audience and who you're talking to, that can involve, it seems, hours of lecturing as opposed to a simple 30-second answer. But maybe you can have a go at it and then we can move from there. What do you actually see as a real insight?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So I think we need to, as you say, it varies depending on who you're talking to and what you're talking about. So, when I listen to how the word is used, or misused, I suppose, equally as used, it covers a whole range of sins, right? From the lowest level, really any piece of research data gets called an insight, to the highest level when it really is some sort of unique, new understanding that the client didn't have before. So that's on the sort of the micro level. And then if you even take it up to the macro level, obviously, talking about insights as an industry, insights as a sector, as market research to some extent doesn't resonate well as a sexy industry, perhaps, and therefore people are trying to use insights maybe to give it a more sexy image, but also in practice as well, obviously understand that insights is more the market research. Different types of data can also generate insights. Analytics, obviously, being one of them, CX being another. So, some organizations' insights encompasses all three of those elements, really. Customer understanding, I suppose, being a better name for it.
Yeah, I think I've never been a fan of either calling our industry market research or marketing research, and I think I also understand there's certainly understandable reasons for wanting to call yourself an insights professional. I think historically there's been sort of a divide in the business where a lot of people were, historically and even today, kind of nuts and bolts, really focused on data collection, at least on the quant side, or just running focus groups. And then there are the insights professionals by various names, who are really trying to take marketing research to a consultancy level. And I think there's always been some kind of tension. I've sensed it, at least in disagreement about what the actual role of marketing research is. Have you come across that yourself too?
Yeah, definitely for good and for bad, right? I mean, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the word, or the phrase market research, having been brought up in the industry. I appreciate the professionalism that it gives, the standards, the knowledge, the know-how, that really it needs to be done well, right? I mean, it's not as simple as it looks on the outside. And that's our challenge, especially today with the software and the tools available. Basically, anybody can claim to be a market researcher. Anybody can have the tools to do what a professional does, but not necessarily obviously do it with a professional's skill and diligence. So, having that market research as a profession is not a bad thing. On the other hand, when you look at it from an end client perspective, where they're looking at outcomes and not methodologies, they don't want to buy market research, right? They want to buy solutions to their customer insight problems. And therefore, defining ourselves by our methodology is a negative in that instance. So I see it both ways, right? That there's advantages and disadvantages. I really would love us to have a name that describes what we do, but nobody's come up with one yet. So maybe we ought to do some research and try and find out.
I remember maybe 10 years ago, sitting with a couple of very senior clients in Japan, two Japanese gentlemen who were very wealthy, both had been educated in the United States, etc. But they were very, very senior people in two very large Japanese corporations. And we had this discussion. And one of them had the reason for the discussion was one of them had recently, his company had just changed the market research department to the insights department.
Right.
And this guy was dead against it. He'd been told by headquarters, no, it's part of what we're doing globally. And he said, yes, but the problem is that department doesn't create insights. They create the information that helps us get to an insight. And it sort of brought home to me that you have that dilemma, because his point was that he expected his senior marketers, for example, to be able to draw on whatever information and data was provided, and for them to equally be involved in coming up with the insight, because his attitude was anybody can come up with the insight, but you need specialists to come up with the ammunition to get there. Yeah, whatever the ammunition may be, whatever form.
It's a good point.
It's a very good point. And, about the same time, it's true that, there were different organizations, and I honestly don't remember which ones they were, but different market research organizations around the world that were talking and actually actively, running competitions to see, should we change our name, or what should we change our name to? And it always struck me that whenever a client mentioned that to me, they'd go, why would you do that? Geez, that's a really hard thing to get into, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's part of what you said about the value chain, right? That insights are perceived as more valuable than market research as a product in some way, and therefore, our industry doesn't want to become commoditized as a data collection industry for one specific type of data. I think it's also a power struggle game, both within the industry, as the industry competes with design agencies, consulting companies, marketing communication agencies, to who as external partners best can serve clients at understanding the market, understanding the customers. And that same game gets played out on the internal side in many organizations, where you have insights or market research in some way competing with data analytics and CX, for example, to who owns insights within the organization. And it's a power struggle, a budget struggle, image, a job struggle at the end of the day. So it becomes personal as well as professional.
I think that's a key point, Andrew, about what goes on the inside clients. We often, at least on the outside, on the agency side, tend to think about it from perhaps the wrong angle. As you say, very often, and I think it's getting more complicated now because you have so many different, you have, the analytics of customer interactions, customer satisfaction, various types of data science and things depending on the particular industry, plus the, a lot of marketing researchers today, or those departments seem to be focusing really, or for a while have focused on really being liaisons with ad agencies. On the communication. So you have all different, as you say, all these different things going on. So it must be very difficult to deliver insights when you have not necessarily warring factions, but in some respects, as you point out, it does resemble that.
Yeah, well, it does, and I was talking to a client a few months ago, which had that problem at the C-suite level, right? Where marketing and innovation had both done their own research, as it were, and coming into the senior management meeting with different recommendations, different data for what they should be doing, and the CEO turned around and said, fake news guys, go out, come back with one point of view. Don't waste my time presenting different facts to me. I can't deal with that. I don't have the expertise to understand which of you is telling the truth.
Yeah, information overload is something managers have been complaining about since the 1970s, if not prior to that. And, I'm sure all of us, once a week, hear from clients saying, I've got all this data. I don't know what to do with it. You have these data are telling me to do this. These data are telling me to do this. All these other data are totally confusing, and they're not telling me anything. How do I put it all together?
Yeah, which is where we come back to the professionalism, right? The need for that, to have that professional control in some respects, but at the same hand, liberate insight. So as Dave was saying, that insights can't happen in an ivory tower, right? They need to be embedded in the organization, but it can't be the Wild West either. So, it can't just come down to who shouts the loudest or who has the most power within the organization, that their point of view becomes the insight. That's very dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Andrew. I not last week before, I'm getting the weeks mixed up. Yeah, nearly 2 weeks ago, I was actually asked to run a Zoom seminar for 500 marketers for a particular global company. So they had 500 marketers listening into a 2-hour session where I was asked to talk about this subject of, what is an insight, and what difference can it make? And what was interesting about it was the context of it was this global company. I guess don't think I can actually say what it is, but a very, very big global company that everybody's heard of has just realigned their training, but also their marketing tool process. And so what they were doing was getting outsiders to run some seminars about different aspects of things. And one of the things they asked me to talk about was what you were saying, which is, as they said, we have, hundreds of offices around the world, thousands of marketers and market researchers, and everybody. They can't all come up with an insight. If every one of them comes up with an insight, we'll never get anything done. We need 2 or 3 insights that will get us to this year to move us on to next year. And so it was all about a process of like, well, how do you weed through things to go from, that's all great, interesting findings, to no, that's more meaningful. No, that's an insight that will make a real difference. And as a group, as an organization, that's what we should focus on. And I just wondered if you could just sort of comment on your own experience, as working with companies as they go through that need to aggregate and sort of get down to, well, what is the insight, or what is the the thing that we're going to do.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? I mean, you can't do everything in this focus. I think the dual challenge there is, as much as I advocate for customer insight and market research and customer centricity, that needs to be married with an equal dose of creativity. Because I fear at the moment, when you look at the world, it's becoming a world of sameness, right? All cars look the same, all banks have the same service, right? Because they're all customer focused. They're all uncovering the same insights, basically. And they're all building their service models based upon those insights, whilst forgetting that at the end of the day, they need to differentiate from the competition if they're going to succeed in the market. So I think, there's a need for that balance between, listening and understanding the customer and getting insights from that, but really taking the time and the step to say, well, what does that mean for us? How do we use that information differently from how everybody else is using it, right? Because the ability to be first to the market with something can gain sustainable competitive advantage for most industries just doesn't exist. Right? As soon as you come up with something, it's copied within 5 minutes and everybody's doing it. So, you can't protect insights in that respect. I think you have to think of it as a dual thing. Understand, but then differentiate with it. So that's what I would recommend people to do. And part of that is obviously understanding what makes your own company different, what's your own culture, what's your own market strengths, and making sure that the insights tie in to that rather than live separately from that. So purpose obviously being key in today's world. What is the company's purpose? How does that purpose differ from the competition? How do the insights drive that purpose? So it's not just customer centric, it's also purpose centric in the use of insight.
So I'm sure you've sat through meetings, and I actually had one just the other day where I started laughing too hard because about 5 minutes in to what was obviously going to be a 40-minute presentation from an in-house marketing insights director was his title. He spent the first couple of minutes explaining the background to why 3 different pieces of research have been done, and he was supposed to be showing us the outcome of this. And then about 5 minutes into it, he said, "Now I'm going to go into details now and take you through the 72 insights we discovered." And I just laughed. I couldn't help it. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. 72 insights. And of course, what he meant by insights, and a different subject, but I remember once, and I use this as examples when I'm running workshops, is I once got a series of briefs from the world's biggest coffee company for new advertising campaigns. And in 6 months, I got a number of different briefs, but the insight that was written into the briefs were things like, people in offices like to take coffee breaks in the afternoon, or at the most common time to drink coffee in the office is around 4 o'clock, or people will drink coffee in an afternoon break as a relief. And it was like, this was literally the insight upon which they wanted whole new advertising campaigns built around. And you had to sort of sit there and go, no, that's not an insight. Because it's not differentiating enough, right? So it's not helping us understand something different to what we already understand about the world.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. I think part of the challenge is that I think we need to become much more cleverer at the type of research we do. And I like to use sort of a model when I talk about insights to talk about hindsight, insight, and foresight, and to have companies think about that terminology to sort of framework their budget.
Could you give us an example of what you mean by that?
So a perfect example, obviously, of hindsight would be a tracker, customer sat survey, looking at the past, right, measuring what's been achieved. And it's an important part of research to do that, right, to that rear view mirror to understand what's happened. I think it's an important part, but it's from a market research perspective, it's a dying part as, you know, more data becomes digitalized, that sort of data becomes readily available. But it's important to understand that. Then for insight, for me, really, in this model is all around in the moment type learnings. So it could be around CX is a good example of where you need insight, where you can actually change processes, you can actually develop products, advertising, another place where I would say it's more insights than anything else. And then for me, you know, where I'd like most of the budget to be spent is on foresight, right? What's going to happen next? What if scenarios? How do we change? How do we get ahead of the curve? How do we understand consumers' needs 3 years from now? That's really where the value to the organization lies, in my opinion. And it's hard, right? They're not easy questions to answer. And you're not going to get 72 insights coming out of that type of research, you know, but you're going to come out with one or two things that, going back to your earlier point, could maybe helpfully steer the company. Hey, let's put that in our strategic plan for the next 3 years. And it becomes the cornerstone of the business, off of which, you know, a heap of research gets built down the pipeline. So everything feeds back into that original hypothesis. And obviously you need to be flexible and agile and so on and so forth, but you need a few key things that you've tied your hat on, that this is where the world's going and this is where we want to be focusing our resources. So I like that model in terms of understanding, you know, really what type of research are you doing? What are you expecting from the research? So you don't expect from, you know, a tracker a heap of insight, right? That's not its function. Its function is just provide the metrics, get you going, get the organization feeling that they're on the right track and move forward or change. But it's not, you know, don't put too much hope on that type of project, right? Giving you aha moments.
That's such an excellent overview. And it begs the question then, now and then perhaps in the next few years, thinking broadly about insights and insights professionals, people who are looking, clients or marketing research agencies or whatever, consultants who are looking to build that capacity, what sort of people, what sort of skills should they be on the lookout for?
Oh, crumbs, that's a good question. So multiple skills is the simple answer to that. You know, I think it really is, or multiple skilled teams, you know, is another way of doing it, right? Whether you need or expect one person to have all of the skills, I'm not sure. Maybe teamwork is more valid in this respect, but innate curiosity would be number one. You know, I think if the person is not innately curious to understand, to think differently, to pause, I think they're not going to be in that new world. You know, all the training in the world, all the techniques and knowledge in the world, if you're not curious, if you don't want to see things differently, are not going to help you. I think that's important. I would say, married to that, a business hat. Right? I think it's something that our industry still lacks broadly, is an understanding of how businesses function, how insights are actually used or can be used within the business context, what value they can add and how to decision making, and really have a sharp focus on that, on the business questions, right? Not just the research questions, but what really are the business questions. And what I find when I work with clients on that is we find out that they should have been doing different types of research in the end of the day, right? Because they didn't bother to take the time to really understand what the business question was and what the drivers of that decision. And it's only when you understand that, I think, can you start to build the right research tools. So then I suppose the third school then still must be a research expertise to be understand all the different methodologies, all the different tools out there, to be able to cherry pick the right ones to really capture that business question and deal with it in a cost effective and timely manner, which is so important today.
Do you think because you sit as you do, sort of, I won't say on the top of the industry, but you know, you are a leader of the industry and you get to see what's going on around the world in ways that many of us don't. Do you think the industry is moving in the right direction in terms of, as you say, training and teaching people the right skills?
In places, I think, if we look at it on a global level, I would say more can be done, right? Definitely. I think there's obviously a short-term focus, which both companies and clients now have, which is detrimental to this ability to train and focus on the long term. So I see a lot of running around chasing tails, trying to maximize budgets, trying to survive, basically, which is not the mindset you need to be able to set aside time and money for training and new stuff. So on a global level, on a general level, I say yes, not enough investment is put into people, not enough investment is put into training, not enough investment is put into developing skills and hiring, buying in new talent. But I understand the challenge around that, where the industry or the sector hasn't been strongly enough demonstrating its value to get a decent margin put a decent margin on value creation. It's had a margin on production, but have we ever managed to get a decent margin on value creation? I would argue that probably not, and that's what's missing, right? Until we as an industry can have a value proposition which is based on a solid understanding of our value amongst the buyers, it's always going to be a struggle, right? We risk becoming commoditized and sort of labeled as this data collector function.
Right. Because I overlap greatly in the advertising world and the world of strategy planners, and the planning group based out of the UK has done a great job in recent years, and some people inside some of the market research companies have done a great job in looking at things like effectiveness cases and being better able to articulate what is the insight that led to an effective piece of advertising, an effective piece of marketing. It's sort of interesting because and there are some interesting books, and yes, some of them have been written. Ollie Wood from System Winers last year wrote a fantastic book called Lemon around this. Right. But it's sort of interesting because from a client's perspective and a marketer's perspective, that is being led by the planners groups, as I say, primarily out of the UK, which is probably the most famous planners group as an independent industry organisation. And I find it sort of interesting because I sit there and I go, well, there's the side of me. I was a planner for 30 years inside a big agency. So for me, yeah, that's great. And it's terrific. And that's exactly what I wanted. And that's what we tried to do. But we used to complain as inside ad agencies about, well, we don't actually show enough how we create value. And that seems to be being overcome now. And I'm just wondering, does the market research industry need to, I don't know, create the right tools, the published reports, the books, etc., that indicate how we get to the insights that get to the value, etc.
Yeah, I think we need to have a much stronger belief in what we do, or we need to be better marketers, right? I think at the end of the day, that we need to realize that we need to demonstrate our value, in particular within organizations, right, where budgets are finite and there's huge competition at the moment for internal budgets. I said, CX will eat insights lunch if they can, let alone digital marketing, right, which will say that, we can give an ROI on anything. So, this huge competition for budgets, which at the end of the day, insights needs, if it's going to survive, right, we need to have room within the budget for experimentation, for exploring the unknown, because that's where the magic's found. But no CFO is going to give you the money if they don't believe that the rest of what you're doing is delivering a sound return. Right. So you don't need to prove the return on everything, which has always been the excuse that's been given for not doing this. It's because it's difficult. You know, you can't always do it. Time lags, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying that's fine. That's fine. But at least for the areas where you can do it, right? Measure what you can, forecast what you can't measure. And then for the rest, create a damn good story, right? And those three things combined, a solid measurement, a solid forecast, and a wonderful story, will demonstrate the value of insights. That we know. But it's part of the job, right? It should be part of the job. And, you know, it's when I look at how insights people are spending their time, you know, even the leaders, most of them are running projects, right?
That's
running their tail. Their metric for success is how many projects we did last year with how much less money than the year before.
Yes.
Right?
Defeats the purpose entirely. You know, why bother?
It puts food on the table short term, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate your insights. I think I'm going to listen to this, at least, you know, what you and Dave have been saying over and over again, and hopefully our listeners will as well. We're going to have to wrap things up here, I think, pretty quickly. Dave, is there anything else you have to say or ask?
Well, I was just going to say, this, you know, and Andrew and I have known each other for a number of years, and I think we always meet at the coffee sessions in conferences, right? So
best place,
But best place. But, you know, it's just, I really do think that, you know, there should be some off-air discussion about how we take this forward. I love this discussion, and I would love to see more of it on the stages at different events. You know, I think when I think about the market research industry, in my experience of going to conferences, and you've been going to them for decades, so have ISOs, Kevin, and we have seen a slight shift because they used to be boring as anything. At least the presentations are usually more interesting, but the presentations tend to be about functionalities, if you like, of, you know, we did this and this is what we got out of it. Here's a case study. And maybe a bit more of this, you know, what do we have to do to, you know, how do we actually change the perception, and how do we actually create, as you say, the value that shows that.
Right. Well, that's one thing, right? But I think more importantly is who's in the room.
Yeah.
Right? Who are we talking to?
I know, and I do mean that. I do that. I think it'd be great to take this discussion more outside of the, you know, the Market Research Society conferences where we all talk to ourselves. You know.
No, one of the, you know, let's take behavioral economics, right? One of the leading advertising agencies just put on a behavioral economics online conference, 30,000 attendees. Or registrants. Right.
Exactly.
Why aren't we in those rooms, right? Why
well,
aren't we
you know,
doing that?
And as we're recording this in July 2020, and, you know, before we came live, we were discussing, you know, things like how many Zoom meetings a day we have. And how, you know, and I've personally probably done 20 Zoom-based webinars over the last 3 months for different clients and different organizations, and being part of panels and things, and as of you. And I think, you know, we've now learned the power of doing it this way, perhaps, and maybe some of us and our organizations need to rethink about how we market the things we need to market, get those audiences involved.
That's right. You know, get outside the box, right? But thanks very much, guys, for inviting me. I've enjoyed it. Yeah, and hopefully your viewer or your listeners enjoyed this one.
I'm sure they will. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care, guys.
Okay.
Hope to see you soon.
All right.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.